Illinois' gun and magazine ban in federal court today. What are your predictions? Will this law in Illinois, it's the governor saying that, hey, there's 8 other states that have this. Why can't Illinois? But do you think that recent Supreme Court precedent in the Bruin case is determinative of how Illinois' law will fare now it's being challenged in federal court with a hearing today? I want to hear from you at 217-629-7970. Live and local again, 217-629-7970. That's the phone number. The question of enforcement, of course, came up even before the measure passed. You had sheriffs saying that they didn't want to enforce this, saying that it goes against the Constitution and they're there to protect constitutional rights. The governor asked about this time and again throughout the past couple of months. Early on, he was asked about it, and we even talked with Sangamon County Sheriff Jack Campbell about this. So here's a little bit about that back and forth.
Took an oath of office to uphold the law. As law enforcement, that's their job, and I expect them to do that job. You can have all the resolutions and declarations that you want. The reality is that the laws that are on the books, you don't get to choose which ones people are going to follow. If you don't like it, go petition for a change in the legislation or in Springfield. But as it is, you don't get to decide I'm going to drive 150 miles an hour on the highway and there should be no consequences. And the same thing is true about carrying out the assault weapons ban and a ban on high-capacity magazines, and also switches that are changing regular guns into essentially machine guns or automatic weapons. So I think we did the right thing. It was a consensus. There even was a Republican vote for it, and overwhelming support across the state of Illinois, including in downstate Illinois, for this kind of a ban. Remember, nobody's guns are getting taken away from them. There are plenty of other weapons that aren't covered at all by this ban, and this ban is really focused on the same kinds of weapons that were banned by the federal government for 10 years, and we saw a significant downdraft in the number of people who were shot and killed as a result of the passage of that assault weapons ban.
There's evidence to push back against that.
Just because they had enough votes to pass this, time will tell whether or not it upholds constitutional scrutiny, but that doesn't mean we have to enforce it if we clearly know this is a violation of our Second Amendment rights. Our deputies have a lot to do in this county. Our job is to provide this security blanket for all the county, and the last thing we want to do is make a criminal out of a legal gun owner. And, we are not going to proactively go around and see if somebody registered their weapon. We're going to use good discretion. We always have had discretion on our side. And that is one thing we're going to do. We're going to use discretion, educate people as to what the law says, and ensure that they know, what they should be doing. And again, one thing we will not do is bring them to our jail. If that is the sole charge that they have is a violation of this act, they will not be housed in our jail, and we will make that clear to all the chiefs in Sangamon County. Absent other circumstances, absent other crimes that were committed or lengthy criminal history, we will not be housing anybody solely on that charge.
So again, that's Sheriff Jack Campbell here in Sangamon County, just one of dozens of sheriffs across the state that said that they're not going to enforce this. And I'd love to hear from you now at 217-629-7970. That's the phone number here, live and local. Let's get to your phone calls. What are your predictions? How do you see that this is going to play out? Do you think that the plaintiffs have it right here, that the Bruin decision, a Supreme Court decision out of New York last summer that says that you can no longer gauge gun legislation being challenged on the balancing of principles, saying that, yes, you can limit constitutional rights for public safety, or you can't do that, the court says, according to the plaintiffs, and they're going to argue that today in federal court. I want to hear from you, your predictions, 217-629-7970. Good morning, you're on WMAY.
So I'm sorry, Greg, I'm just tuning in. Did this pass then?
It passed back January 10th when the governor signed this into law. Here we are now. Somebody noted 94 days after passage or so. It's the law of the land. And on Monday, this Monday, just a few days ago, you had a measure of this kick in that says you can't have these weapons, these firearms, out in public places unless it's completely broken down and in a closed case. You can only take it to a private location with that private property owner's explicit permission. If you have a concealed carry weapon, if you're found with a magazine that's not in compliance with this, and that's any magazine that's more than 10 rounds for a rifle or more than 15 rounds for a handgun. So if you've got a magazine that holds 16, you're going to be out of compliance and face a petty offense with a $1,000 fine. And if you are found out of compliance with having a certain firearm illegally, you could face up to a Class 2 felony. Keep in mind, you've got another date kicking in. And that's October 1st when state police are going to open up the registration portal. So let's hear from you at 217-629-7970. That's the phone number here on WMAY. Again, 217-629-7970. Let's line those phone calls. Getting your phone calls about the prediction you have for Illinois' gun and magazine ban. It's in federal court today. The judge could take it under advisement, but could issue a preliminary injunction halting the law or side with the states. Either way, it's expected to be up on appeal to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, and then from there, likely the U.S. Supreme Court. Quick question, though, being asked on the chat via YouTube about the registration. Is there any fee? And if you go to the state police's FAQ, the frequently asked questions, you can see there it talks about the registration and how much does it cost to register an AR-15 or, quote, assault weapon as defined by the new law. There is no registration fee. So I just wanted to make clear that people understood that. All right, let's go ahead and get to your phone calls. This individual's been patient through the break. Thanks. Good morning. You're on WMAY. Your prediction.
Good morning, Greg. Cautiously optimistic. I don't know that the state government has given me a lot of positive results over the last few years, but with something like this involving constitutional rights, I'm cautiously optimistic because it's really tough to go against that document. I think my biggest concern is if they're going to limit constitutional rights based on their assumption that it's a threat to the public, then it will not stop with that. It will move to free speech. If somebody's saying something that they think is dangerous to the public, they'll try to limit that. Or, the right to assembly, the right to petition the government, or a speedy and public trial. All these things that...
Well, I tell you, they've already done limits to a speedy trial. COVID led to a lot of people having that right being denied, but nobody really brought challenges to it.
Right, and I think that in general, the general public is like, well, if it doesn't affect me personally, then it's not that big of a deal. But I don't think that people understand that it affects us as a group of citizens, like all of us, at some point or another. It may not be you personally, but it's going to affect your neighbor. It's going to affect your child someday. Like all of these things will take a toll on the community at large if people don't stand up and fight for their rights. And I know that's difficult or scary or whatever, but that's how these people remain in power and continue to just kind of, we are their puppets after a while because they don't have any opposition. And those that oppose are labeled as, extremists, like Pritzker's saying about people running for school boards and stuff like that. And it's just crazy how their language is changing how people view things and how people are viewed just by saying those comments without having the receipts to prove that those people are who they are.
Well, I appreciate the call and love to take some more at 217-629-7970 with your predictions. There's about 2.4 million firearm owner ID card holders in the state of Illinois. That's how many people are going to be impacted by this, and I would imagine a lot of them have weapons that fit into this category, as there's 170 different semi-automatic rifles, shotguns, and pistols, plus all the magazines that are considered expanded that are impacted by this. One quick text here before I get to the next call. It says, I predict the court will punt to the Supreme Court. And this is in federal court, by the way. I asked the texter, what about an injunction? So no injunction. They say perhaps until the other court heard the case, I think is good chance there would be an injunction. Our governor, it's the law of the land, and it will be enforced unless it's about immigration law, and we don't enforce those laws. He says a double standard. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Good morning, Greg. Once again, you played the clip of the governor speaking about law enforcement and taking an oath to uphold the law. And I want to remind you again about a Supreme Court case that took place back in the early 1900s that stated any law that violates the Constitution is not a law and should be ignored. And I would hope that our law enforcement did not take an oath to uphold the law as much as they did to uphold the Constitution. And I think our politicians need to read the Constitution, especially the ones that are trying to pass these kind of laws. And isn't it ironic when they're pushing this kind of legislation through that we have all these mass shootings going on all of a sudden? I think people really need to pay attention, and they also need to be very aware when they're in public, because these pop-up shootings can happen at any time because they're trying to push through this type of law.
Well, I don't want to necessarily get into the realm of, conspiracy theory and the problem, reaction, solution or whatnot, but bottom line is there that you have a right to protect yourself, and the Second Amendment spells that out. The Second Amendment is not, and our constitutional rights are not limits on the individual. The argument is they're limits on government. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And for people to be able to protect themselves from possible pop-up violence that we seem to be inundated with news about, that includes the ability to protect yourself, and people don't want to be told what they can and cannot protect themselves and their families and their property with. So, of course, we'll have all the latest. Follow me, Bishop on Air, on Twitter for the latest. The federal courts in Southern Illinois, East St. Louis, I'll be there and keep you updated.
From the Fly SPI studio.